Good afternoon. We are launching a vital question for the future of European economy. Do we need a change of the current economic model, or we could continue business as usual? The treaties are clear, at least about describing the outcome to achieve. European Union is a social market economy. During the latest 2-3 decades, nevertheless, instead of building a social market economy everywhere in the Union, we have legal basis for it. We have succeeded in getting a market economy and a market society. And it is not an old play, unfortunately, including those member states which were praised in the past for their social systems are in danger now. By recently, every big economic crisis was an opportunity to change the economic model. After the Great Depression, last century, the model of action based on laissez-faire has been replaced by Keynes and the policy related with Keynesianism. The stagflation in the 70s led to a new change, and Milton Friedman came and replaced Keynes for decades already. After the catastrophic failure of the markets in regulating themselves 10 years ago, nothing changed. Macroeconomic balance means targeting inflation, never unemployment, fiscal discipline, reducing the level of taxes, and understanding their role only as automatic stabilizers, not instruments of intervention. Maastricht criteria are still unchallenged seriously. Structural reforms in the liberalization of everything direction are still present. The great moderation paradigm and neoliberal policies I briefly described before look as stronger as before. Moreover, there are not only dominating theories or practices. Through economic governance, through European semester, they entered the legal system and are shaping our policies more than ever before. Good ideas, as social impact assessment of every decision taken, were formulated but not implemented. The European Semester Report 2018 shown that only 7% of country recommendations on the social field have been taken into account. For comparing, 85% of those recommendations concerning the safety of the powerful financial sector have been implemented. For discussing these issues and many others with you, and for inspiring us for debate, we have invited here 3 significant speakers. I kindly asked them to use 10 minutes each at the beginning in order to preserve time enough for the interventions from the floor of my colleagues and for answers and comments in the end. And all participants willing to intervene, not to forget to fill the card and to register as early as possible. I invite firstly Mr. Eugen Orlando Teodorovic, Romanian Minister of Finance and President of ECOFIN Council during Romanian presidency. Eugen is a quite experienced member of the government in spite of his young look, being Minister for European Affairs, for European funds actually, and for a while Minister of Finance in a former Social Democrat government also. Before being a minister, he occupied countless executive positions, mainly dealing with European funds. He is, for the second term, an active member of European Affairs Committee in the Senate, the very committee I've been chairing. Minister, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will speak in English because my colleagues prepared my speech in English, so that's why. But for questions, I'll be very open to reply to you in English. So, Deci, doamnă președinte, stimați colegi parlamentari.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, for me it is an honor to take the floor in this interparliamentary conference on the future of the EU. When we speak of the future of the EU, we cannot just ignore the past, the vision of personalities such as Robert Schuman, who on the 9th of May 1950 said Europe will not be built overnight or as a result of a single plan, but there will be targeted achievements that will achieve a union de facto. In fact, the moment when the most important trends of the Romanian presidency in the Committee of Economic and Financial Affairs, I insisted on immediate results for the European citizens and for maintaining the European project during these times of challenges. Last month, I took part in the Region Summit of the regions, and the declaration will be submitted in Sibiu on the 9th of May. Starting from one point of the declaration of the Summit of the Regions, namely, we wish the European integration not to be a reversible process, and continuing with other ideas on the future of the EU, I would like to emphasize that if we wish to have a strong Europe in the world, we have to continue the good things that we started and at the same time consider the following. We need a new vision on the European Union. We wish to play a more active role in the construction of the new vision. We promoted courageously, both in the ECOFIN in Brussels and in all the discussions with our European partners, a number of decisions that need to be adopted in order to have, as a result, more cohesion and more investments for a stronger Europe. So we speak of a moment in time when courage matters. Europe needs to adopt a new vision because of all policies. The cohesion policy is the one which has the most significant impact on the lives of citizens, leading to bridging of gaps, social inclusion, and an increase of the living or better living standard. In Romania, the cohesion policy is reflected in numbers. Romania's GDP went up by 50% in the last 10 years, thanks to the investments of the structural funds and other funds of the European Union. When we speak of having the courage to do things, I'm also thinking of the of Romania's ambition to be a good president of the European Council, this leading to a better living standard of all European citizens, no discrimination made. There are lots of challenges given the current circumstances, but it is my belief that the Romanian presidency has been a success, a thing which has been confirmed by a number of negotiations that were concluded, and the feedback, the positive feedback we receive from our European partners. Second aspect, if we speak of a reform of the economic model, we need to have a unitary approach in the field of investments and the promotion and implementation of the same rules for all actors on the single European market, because it is in this that the beauty of the construction lies. And our motto, unity in diversity, refers to the fact that although we are a large European family with principles, with good things and not so very good things, when we speak of economy and the business environment, we speak of competition. And we need to recognize that there is a fierce competition amongst the member states. But let's not forget that in the world, Europe and the European market are in competition with other areas. So I would say that the economic model in the future of the EU should take into account these realities, leading to an increase of Europe's competitiveness at all levels. going beyond the borders of the European single market. So, as regards the investment policy, we have to think of more people employed, more jobs, a better quality of the labor force and its training, all these leading to an increase of the production and the productivity of all companies of the EU within the world market. Also, implementing the standards should be unitary. I do not agree with differences of any kind. The Euro area, the Schengen area, two-speed Europe. A new vision supposes the courage to change the European regulations in order to step forward in the way in which we spend the European money, even 1 or 2 years before, if this is beneficial for our economies and for our citizens. And even if it is a bit more difficult from a bureaucratic perspective, in short, we speak of the possibility to have investments starting this very year, even before the multi-annual financial framework is adopted, with the help of a mechanism by which the public funds, including the international institutions such as EBRD and all the others, these funds, this money should be paid back in time. A fourth aspect, we have to be prepared and support new ways of financing the needs of the member states. One of the ideas that we discussed being, for instance, a shift in the paradigm of the European Investment Bank, because who knows, pre-allocation of the investments will prove beneficial and will lead to more cohesion. Another aspect, I believe it is beneficial for the welfare, for the better living standard of all the European citizens will be Invest Europe in transports, telecommunication, energy, research, innovation, and this will trigger supplementary and complementary investments. Sixth point, innovation, allocating budgets similar to those allocated by the United States or China in order to support the companies that work in the IT field as well as in research and development. These should be part of our future vision for the EU, because this will mean new jobs that require a very high level of specialization. The products and services made in the EU will improve the lives of lots of people. There is an Innovation European Council. With its help, the European companies will be more performant and they will have available all the instruments they need in order to place Europe in the top for biotechnology, for production with zero emissions. One other aspect, identifying solutions for one of the problems facing the EU, the legislation governing the procurement. The solutions should be simple and common for procurement organized in all member states. We need to implement this new international instrument which regulates this difficulty on market conditions that should be fair and non-discriminating. Now, speaking of the long-lasting development of the EU, we should also approach the promotion of an industry that is environment-friendly. In 2019, the EU earmarked 444 million euro of European funds in 77 projects that delivered 221 significant innovations and encouraged innovative industrial processes. We will continue to support research and development for renewable energy and for technologies that have a very low level of pollution. So the way in which the negotiations are concluded will be very important in InvestEU because it will finance investments in infrastructure and ecological industry or eco-friendly industry. We shouldn't also leave aside another important component which differentiates the EU from the rest of the world, namely social protection. During the financial crisis, the rate of poverty and the risk of social exclusion reached negative values. This is why our public policies should protect the children and the young people, providing equal chances for women and making sure that our elderly have enough income in order to live decently wherever they live in Europe. Another important topic is the strengthening of the economic and monetary union in all its components, the banking union and the union of capital markets. I should mention here that Romania strongly supported the idea that all talks around the monetary policy should involve all member states. There are a number of aspects that are discussed in ECOFIN, others that are being discussed in other EU commissions. Sometimes the information that is the output, the information is contradictory. But we need to find the best solutions. This is one of the reasons why I started discussing with other finance ministers so that the president of the chair of ECOFIN should take part in all the other meetings, even as an observer. This economic and monetary union is a priority for all the member states of the EU, and the solutions should be adequate both for the Eurozone and the Euro area and outside of that area. The same goes for the budget. We have to solve the problems of the Eurozone and non-Eurozone, because the ultimate purpose is for all of us to be members of the Euro family. My purpose in ECOFIN is that the legislation on the banking union should be adopted in such a way as to strengthen the financial system in the EU, capable to resist international shocks or crises. The capital markets union is important for all of us. This is an important project for all of us in order for the SMEs to have access to financing. One last important point that the future economic model should take into account is the fiscal policy. This policy should be efficient, correct, fair, and transparent, protecting both the budgets of the member states and the budget of the EU, not burdening unduly the European citizens. The system should be more resistant to fraud and contribute to a fair distribution of the revenues amongst all member states, encouraging fair competition. I would like to conclude by reminding those of you who know me or telling those of you who do not know me that there's something I care very much about. One of the advantages of Romania as a member state of the EU is not necessarily the amount of money received from the EU starting the point we became a member, although any such amount is important. For me, the most important gain are the principles and values that accompany the European money, and the fact that now the country is a member of the EU family. Everything needs to start from all these principles and values. This is the essence and the most important added value of the EU. We are different, we are better and stronger than others. As I said My favorite motto concerning the EU is that we should be complementary, we should not be fierce competitors.
For using all your rich experience, you lost the time for answers, and I lost the imagine of a tough lady keeping on time everybody. And now we are moving from the Council to the European Commission, today represented by Mr. Carlos Martinez Mongai, Acting Deputy Director General to DG ECFIN. Mr. Martinez is a long-serving official of European Commission, starting in the early 90s and reaching the top now. There is still a step to the top. Please, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me to start by thanking the Romanian presidency and especially its parliamentary dimension for organizing this, I would say, very interesting and timely conference. And of course, Gabriela, thank you very much for inviting the Commission and in particular DG ECFIN and for your introduction. Well, I think that by now, most of the issues that are the most relevant for this discussion have been addressed either by previous speakers or by the participants in the conference. Some of them have been addressed, many others have been already mentioned, and the only ones that stay left still have been already mentioned by the Minister. So I think that if I combine what I have heard today with the very interesting issues paper that you have distributed for the panel, I would say that, what we can see is to what extent the issue we are dealing with is complex and has a lot of facets, a lot of aspects and corners. I'm not going to react to every possible issue. And what I thought is to, let's say, to articulate my I hope, very short presentation around two main issues. The first one, since we are thinking of the economy of the future, well, the issue is what trends are shaping this economy now. And the second would be what, I'm not going to react or to respond to whether the model should change or not. I will be more, let's say, less ambitious, and I'm going to consider what policies we should implement. So, starting by the long-term trends, I will mention 5. There are many others, but I will mention 5. The first one is rapid technological change coupled with intense globalization. Of course, the opportunities linked to this are huge, new jobs, higher productivity, but at the same time, we are confronting challenges. In particular, we see that the process is biased towards multinational companies and skilled labor. So, and this is a challenge. The second trend that is governing this process is aging. The dependency rate in the EU is 30%, and it can double in 50 years. This points to pressure on social system, on sustainability and public finances, and of course on productivity. The third trend I would like to refer is the fragmentation of the international economic order. There is a clear danger, is protectionism, and then there is, of course, a challenge, is how to, let's say, preserve the level playing field. The fourth point I would like, or the fourth trend I would like to mention is migration. And here the challenge is very clear. We need to integrate migrants in the economy and the society in the long run. Of course, there is an opportunity linked to this trend, is new labor forces for an aging society. Fifth, and last but not least, climate change. Challenges linked to the transition to a low-carbon economy imply competitiveness pressure, imply adjustment cost, but also economic and social opportunities. So I think that these are five, let's say, long-term trends that could help us to understand where we are going. And these five trends are, let's say, on the one hand, interplaying, and on the other hand, shaping the future of the economy. And so far, what we see is that we have a very clear risk is to fall in what we call the 1% economy, with growth at 1%, inflation 1%, and 1% of the society, of the population, bearing and holding more and more income and wealth. So this, as a matter of fact, what we look at the data today, we see that potential growth of the EU economy is below 1.5%. We see, and this of course reflects low productivity growth and the pressure of aging. We see that core inflation is low, which reflects low wage growth in spite of good labor market performance. And this implies, or this has as a consequence, the difficulties to reduce legacies of the crisis. And at the same time, we are aware, or we should be aware, that if the 1% of the population keeps increasing the share of income and wealth, we will go towards a non-sustainable society. Today, what we see is that on top of these trends, we are confronted to a slowdown. All the international institutions, including as well the European Commission in the winter forecast, are pointing to the fact that the economy is slowing down. It's the EU economy and the global economy. In the context of this slowdown, we have two possibilities. One, we can find enough room for maneuver for policy, for economic policy, which would allow us to go very quickly from this slowdown to a more sustained recovery, or we fail to do it, and the risk is that we can come down to a recession and therefore an EU crisis. Therefore, today it is important to, let's say, consider to what extent or how we can implement, all of us, the available economic room for maneuver of economic policy in order to, let's say, allow that or to make that this slowdown is let's say, temporary. In this context, what are the kind of economic policies, what are the kind of reforms that we can implement? I would refer to two. First, the completion of the Economic and Monetary Union, and second, let's say, the need to make growth more inclusive. Starting by the first, so the completion of the Economic and Monetary Union, I will not, let's say, refer to the long list of proposals that everybody knows, but I would like to refer to a series of, let's say, principles. First, the Economic and Monetary Union, the reform of the Economic and Monetary Union should follow a holistic approach. This means that we should avoid looking at the different items as if they were disconnected from each other. For instance, banking union and the capital market unions are typically presented as two separate initiatives, but in reality, there are two sides of the same coin. Capital markets will not develop without a common savings market, and well-functioning capital markets are important to strengthen the resilience of the financial sector. Second, there must be a link between liabilities and governance. To say in a different way, no common liabilities where we have no common governance. However, we should see more rich sharing in those areas where we build a common governance. This is, in my view, the case for advancing faster with a European deposit insurance scheme. Europe has a single rulebook and a single supervisor for large banks. So member states should share the risks from failures in that governance. Third, there should be a single jurisdiction. We should recognize that we need to dig deeper into these single jurisdiction elements, such as common rules for bank insolvency, for instance, to make the resolution framework for banks to work better in practice. Of course, I am not going to the details, but I could recall that the Commission has still on the table a proposal for a stabilization function. Many people say that this stabilization function is not needed in a banking union, and even less if we have large automatic stabilizers. But we see from the past that our large automatic stabilizers may not be sufficient on the one hand, and on the other hand that even in banking unions there is a need for a stabilization function. So this does not, let's say, cancel or avoid the need to have a stabilization function. For the same reason, or to mention just simply another element, I think that we should improve the functioning of the sovereign bond markets. We have one single currency, but we have the monetary policy transmission relies on 19 different sovereign debt markets. So moving to and I finish here. I think I have been short enough. Moving to the second part of the second block of the economic policy reform, I would say economic policy reform should have also the goal of making growth more inclusive. And this means two key words. First, sharing, and second, trust. Sharing more widely the benefits and opportunities, especially in the face of rapid technological progress. This should be a central priority. Second, we cannot separate the aim of providing opportunities for citizens and regions that are not benefiting from globalization from restoring trust in the EU. The risk of disconcerted citizens leading to disintegration is real. To address that, we need a comprehensive policy response. In our economic jargon, we call for pre-market, in-market, and post-market policies. Pre-market policies have been mentioned several times today. These are the policies that aim at providing access to quality of education, to foster innovative ideas, and to provide for universal and fair access to healthcare. In particular, the crucial role of early age education and the lifelong learning should be recognized. Second, concerning in-market policies, what we are advocating, among others, is for a reallocation and efficient reallocations of factors of production. Of course, the core is the broadening and deepening of the single market. And we need to make all the necessary efforts in order to, let's say, protect the functioning of the single market. Of course, we should not forget that in the process of efficient allocation of resources, there are this displacement costs, and in particular those related to globalization and technological change. So we have also to accompany this adjustment process. Finally, the role of the post-market policies is to use taxation to impact market income distribution and to provide for efficient and sustainable public welfare systems. I think that I can finish here, but I would like simply to end by saying that what we need is a good balance of the three types of policies to make sure that the benefits of economic growth are spread more equally. Thank you very much.
We thank you. Minister and Director General both came from where the power sits. I'd like now to invite somebody not representing the power, but I can't. Professor at l'Université Libre de Bruxelles, and senior fellow at Bruegel Institute, André Sapir cannot be separated from his past. He worked from the European Commission too many years, first as an economic advisor, being the main advisor for Romano Prodi, the President Romano Prodi, heading his economic advisory group. And in 2004, he published an agenda for a growing Europe, a report which would remain in the European history as Sapir report. I would introduce the author of Sapir report.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you for your kind words. Mostly thank you for the invitation to this fascinating conference, and thank you really to organize this. I think it's been really a very, very interesting day. Now, the question that you posed us at the start of this panel is whether we in Europe need a new economic and social model. And I'll try to give some elements of answer to this very ambitious question. So I certainly do not pretend to have the answer, but I will try to give some elements. Now, I will try to organize my presentation, my 10 minutes, along 5 points, hopefully not more than 2 minutes per point, maybe some points even shorter. The first point, I can be very, very short. The first point is that I do believe that the world, and we in Europe as part of this world, we are indeed undergoing a great transformation, and that this great transformation is accompanied by two great divides. There's no need to go over what the great transformation is about, because my predecessor, Carlos, indicated the elements. They are linked to globalization, to digital revolution, to climate change, to demography. We know that. I just want to underline for you, the politicians, to take really the full realization of the depth and the speed of this transformation. And I believe that this great transformation, what I call this great transformation, is accompanied by two great divides. A divide within our societies, and we see that everywhere, between those who are better equipped to deal with this transformation, for whom the transformation brings about many benefits, and those who feel at least they are on the receiving end, who are fearing the transformation. They are fearing for their job, they are fearing for their security, for their economic and social security. But there's also a great divide across countries within Europe, but even more so, a great divide across the world, partly between the advanced economies and the emerging economies, or between the technological leaders and the technological laggards. So, first point, a great transformation accompanied by great divides that are creating a number of political issues. Point number two, I come to what the senator said. Europe's social and economic model, as the treaty says, is a social market economy. And to my mind, this social market economy has delivered fairly well. It has delivered fairly well, certainly in terms of cohesion. Obviously, one wishes to have more cohesion, but in terms of cohesion, both in terms of territorial cohesion, that is, how different regions of Europe are doing, or cohesion within countries, sort of social cohesion, I think we are doing fairly well. I agreed with the presentation this morning that showed that in terms of territorial cohesion, certainly the countries of Central and Eastern Europe that have joined in 2004 or after 2004 have had a very fast process of catching up. And this is remarkable, coming from a very low level of income. There's been problems certainly with the crisis and with the euro area crisis in the south of Europe. And this is very worrisome because this is another periphery. So the eastern periphery is doing, I think, fairly well, even very well, but the southern periphery is now lagging behind, is problematic. In terms of, again, social cohesion, whether one is looking at income distribution. I think Europe should not be ashamed of itself, quite on the contrary. Our societies, our welfare state models, however different they are in the different countries, I think are delivering fairly good results. Where I think we are experiencing vis-à-vis other countries, and especially vis-à-vis the US and China, more difficulties is in terms of technology, and particularly in terms of critical technology. Several people have talked about this afternoon, this morning already, about artificial intelligence. And I do think that in those technologies, those critical technologies linked to the digital revolution, Europe is very much lagging behind. And so my response to your question, do we need a new economic and social model? My sense is no, we do not need a new economic and social model. I would be happy if the years ahead with this great transformation, and I think where we are lagging behind in some dimensions, in particular in the technological part, whether we are able to retain our brand of model. I think that there is a serious risk that the world is heading very rapidly. And before we realize, and we are still stuck in discussing about Brexit and about, before that, the euro area crisis or the refugee crisis, very much looking at what's happening in Europe, we are not fully realizing that the world is changing so rapidly. And I think there is a very big risk, I would say a very high probability, that we are headed for a bipolar world, a world where indeed, because of crucial technologies, including artificial intelligence, China and the US will be the two main models. And while we in Europe, we are very proud of our model, and I think we should be proud of our model, I think there is a real question as to whether this social economic model and our system of values, whether they will be able to survive this shock coming from those other big economies. Now, in my mind, where I'm pessimistic is not whether we should change our model, as I said, whether we can keep our model, but are we organized in a manner that is the EU system of governance well enough adapted to the height of the challenges of this transformation and the Great Divide. My sense is that we are not very well organized. And since time is of the essence, I'm not going to give a number of examples. I could come back in the discussion about that. But I do think that coordination, this great European instrument, coordination, to my mind, coordination simply does not work. It does not work in the face of the type of challenges that we are dealing with. Coordination is nice in easy time, when the sea is very, very calm. But if one has to deal with the rapidity and the depth of the kind of changes I'm talking about, I think that coordination is just not enough. At least, if you want coordination to work, you need EU instrument to make it work. Simply coordination and hoping that countries will do what they discuss in Brussels, and then they come back to their capital and they forget about the discussion in Brussels. So I wish that we could have a stronger instrument. So point number 4, I am pessimistic. You may think that I'm too pessimistic about the European model in the face of what I see as the very real risk of a bipolar world dominated by China and the United States and Europe. And we have seen that in the recent trade battles between the US and China. The EU is in a very uncomfortable position. And we can say, yes, Europe has a strong asset, and the strong asset that we have in Europe is the size of our single market. But this is not enough. In terms of asset, we need also more important technology. We need to be able, at the minimum, it seems to me, to be autonomous vis-à-vis the US and China in order to retain our European way of life. So I'm pessimistic, but I'm not defeatist. I do think that there are things we can do, and I come to my concrete proposal, which is my point number 5, and I conclude with that. I do think that indeed, and I think there is a fair consensus, not only on this panel, but also what I've heard this morning, that we do need a strategy for sustainable and cohesive, inclusive growth that meets the challenges of the digital transformation and of climate change. And in order to do that, I would advocate for a two-pronged strategy. One prong of this strategy is you may be surprised that I would say that, a European industrial policy. And the other is about cohesion. So let me just say a few words about the EU industrial strategy. To my mind, there are three elements that we need to have for a strategy. And this strategy obviously has to be a strategy which is linked to digital revolution and ultimately to the decarbonization of our economies. This goal that we have in Europe and that we are presenting to the world with the Paris Agreement, if we want this to be real, one needs to have instruments, we need to have a strategy. It's not just going to fall from the sky. And I do think that an industrial policy at the EU level is needed with three elements. One is a regulatory framework that provides the correct incentive for firms to do the innovation. I do also think that the EU budget must have much more resources for basic research. And I think there we need to inspire ourselves from what's happening in the US with NSF, with the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. We need to look at those issues not just in economic terms. This is not just anymore, as it was the case when I was in charge of this report, 2004, which was sort of mainly an economic issue. I think we have to combine the economic problem that we are facing also with the geopolitical, geostrategic, and I think the industrial strategy has to be part of that. And the third prong of this industrial strategy has got to be a EU public procurement policy. Now, I don't want this EU industrial strategy to come at the expense of competition policy. I think competition policy fits into the social of the social market economy. Because what competition policy is all about is about promoting competition for the benefit of consumers. So this is ultimately the social part of the market economy. But at the same time, I think we have to realize that markets cannot deliver sufficiently on certain issues, especially on critical technology. And it's there in those critical technologies that we do need an industrial policy. And then I conclude with social cohesion. I think there are three instruments that we need to use in Europe for social cohesion. One is the EU Cohesion Funds. Sure, we have quite a lot of resources on cohesion funds. My sense is that those resources, I don't want to cut them, they can even be expanded, but they need to be better used, need to be more focused towards objectives. They need to be clear objectives and need clear delivery. Second, I think the cohesion funds, there needs to be a requirement. And this is not, I'm not talking in particular about Romania. I'm talking about many, many countries in the European Union, also in the old EU countries, where I think we suffer in many of our member states about poor quality of public governance. And there is no way that you can have real cohesion and wealth spending of the cohesion funds without having a higher quality of the public governance. So I wish that part of the EU cohesion funding be used to improve and to monitor the public governance. And the last point, which has been raised on many occasions during this conference, is about taxation. I do think that although the single market is clearly one of our main assets for our economic dynamism, the single market cannot be promoting tax erosion and tax evasion. So we do need to have policies about that, because this is about ultimately about the cohesion and about the welfare state. So my answer is no, we do not need to change our economic and social model. I believe that Europe's economic and social model is the right model. What I fear is that that model is under threat, both under threat domestically and globally. Thank you very much.
We thank you very much for your contributions. I don't agree entirely, excepting three. We need a strategy, and we don't have. The budget is a relic, and coordination, it is a weak instrument. And now I would keep silent and invite my colleagues to take the floor. There are many. The last report, 17, willing to take the floor, starting with Ausra Maldeikene. I don't have my glasses. Please.
Dear colleagues, during the first session, we had an exceptionally meaningful presentation made by Mr. Eickhout, the leading candidate of European Greens. So why did I think that the presentation was meaningful? Because this politician did not proclaim slogans, did not state how things ought to be, but he speaks the way things really are. We have a lot of commotion and chaos in European Union. Brexit is one of the faces of this chaos, but the chaos has many faces. This situation emerged because politicians on the European level, just like politicians in their home countries, stopped talking about politics and reduced it to technical solutions, often introduced by technocrats with their own agendas. We need to understand that we can't reform economic model without new attitudes to the labor. A very concrete example from my own country with the European context. Some days ago, our Prime Minister, presenting his presidential candidate speech, ironically, he also is connected to Greens, but maybe not the same Greens as Mr. Eickhout, managed to state two diametrically opposing ideas in 50 minutes. On the one hand, he stated that he fully supports the European pillar of social rights, but later he stated that he categorically opposes mobility package, which is to shape the rules in the European freight market. Lithuanian freight market business is based on cheap labor, usually imported from the Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Moldova, or Belarus, cruel working conditions of people who work in this sector, low social safety standards for the workers in this sector, enforced by law, which the employees managed to push through legislation. In both cases, our Prime Minister thought that he was correct. Why? Because Jackson office of various ministries provided him with this information, but there was no politician to combine these two conflicting nations and see the controversy. I have to state with great sadness that in similar fashion, a lot of European countries stress that the level of EU funding is too low, but the same countries, especially in periphery, are not inclined to use this EU funding to create more just societies. Therefore, we have increasing levels of inequality. We do not have an inclusive labor market, and we see an increasing disillusionment in European Union. These trends are disturbing and must be overcome. And we have to overcome them by speaking honestly, not by repeating enchantments or moving aimlessly, just like walking deads. We had to do it yesterday, and because we failed to do it, let's do it today. Instead of watching the European body politic cracking and splitting.
Thank you very much. I kindly ask the contributors to pick up the problems for the end of the meeting. And now, the Chairperson of European Affairs Committee in the Portuguese Parliament, Regina Bastos.
Thank you, Gabriela Cretu. Dear colleagues, I would like to congratulate Gabriela Cretu and the Romanian presidency on their initiative to organize this conference on the future of Europe. Congratulations on placing national parliaments at the center of this crucial debate. We must insist on the need for a deeper reform of the euro area. This reform is essential for the benefit of the economy and, of course, of our citizens. We have been talking about this reform since the economic and financial crisis of 2008 and the euro crisis, which have had severe economic consequences and have demanded huge sacrifices from our citizens. We need to show them that we have learned political and social lessons from this crisis. However, while the EU is more attentive to signs of crisis and the ICB has done its part, it is also true that completing the economic and monetary union is lagging behind. Despite the progress made, we need to complete it by implementing its third pillar, the European Deposit Insurance Scheme, and ensure the growth of the banking union and development of the European Monetary Fund that will allow the desired stability and the European economy. The new MFF will also be fundamental for the future of the EU, and the challenge ahead is trying to limit the loss of funds and guaranteeing the funding of new policies like migration and security while maintaining the focus on cohesion and solidarity amongst all member states. Thank you very much.
We thank you. And now I give the floor to Lavinia Craivanu, representing Romanian Senate. The next speaker will be Giuseppina Occhionero, d'Italia.
Honorable Chairwoman, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm very glad to be here today with you, and I would like to take the organizer for to thank the organizer for the work they put in this conference. The challenges facing in the European Union nowadays are different from those that the world economy was confronting with in the past, when the crisis emerged. Today's challenges arise in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, defined by a strong digitalization influencing both the macro and the microeconomic levels. As we all know, the European Union is currently at the stage as deepening the economic and monetary union. Needless to say, from now on, we should concentrate on fully achieving this integration stage. It is a widely shared view that the economic and monetary union needs further structural improvements to ensure a stable currency and to foster economic growth within the European Union. On the one hand, it is necessary to strengthen the monetary union. I believe it is mandatory to take measures in order to facilitate the enlargement of the Eurozone to all member states, and by developing programs to help them adapt their national economy to the challenges that came with this change. The hesitation of the European Union when it comes to taking concrete steps forward on EMU reform has to come to an end. The Economics and Monetary Union, as a core pillar of the European Union, is an urgent need of consolidating. The current approach, with limited means of enforcement, is insufficient on addressing the differences between member states' levels of economic development or their disparity between the common monetary policy and national policies. On the other hand, for a complete economic and monetary union, it is necessary to achieve the fiscal union. Without a more tangible element of a fiscal union, the Eurozone will remain fundamentally vulnerable to shocks. For instance, a truly fiscal union should include Eurozone treasury with a common budget, taxes, debt. To conclude, the Economic and Monetary Union is not a political union, and its member states remain very much on their own. These structure levels them exposed to large economic or financial shocks. That is why we need to focus our attention on taking concrete steps in developing and strengthening the Economic and Monetary Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, please keep in mind that everybody is willing to take the floor and to express her views. Josepina Ocionero, the next, Gabi Ionescu. There is a red light somewhere. Please turn off. Yeah? Yeah? Good.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. I wish to thank the Romanian Parliament for the hospitality. I'd like to take this opportunity to the new President of Slovakia, Zuzana Kapitova, a convinced pro-European politician, a woman and a lawyer like myself. And during the debate, from what I gathered, the architecture of the Eurozone still has a number of elements pushing member states towards a sort of moral hazard. But within the monetary union, we have to be virtuous, and even monetary national sovereignty is more bad than good. But what also emerges from what our speakers have said today very clearly is that we are still missing a number of dynamic policies which can foster growth. We're still missing a fiscal union allowing us to fully achieve the economic and monetary institution for the good functioning of our European institutions. We are also lacking insurance against unemployment, which in an anti-cyclical way can mitigate the costs for the fiscal adjustments required during crises. And perhaps we would also need convergence policies between the economies by a further sharing of risks. My question is, why doesn't all of this happen? Perhaps because there is an excessive lack of trust between northern and southern countries. And my final remark would be on the ECB. In order for the economic and monetary union to be fully achieved, perhaps we would have an ECB as a last instant creditor, allowing it to offer help, unconditioned help, even in conditions in which debt runs out of control. Thank you.
Molto grazie. Disappeared the list. Gabi Ionescu, please. Mr. Senator.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman, Gabriela Crețu. I need to speak in my language, Romanian. So,
I am a senator and I am a member of the Committee for European Affairs, and I represent a party which is in opposition. When we discuss reforms and economic models, well, these discussions will never come to an end, because we will see tomorrow what we have decided today is no longer applicable. So I believe we should have a technical rather than political discussion. What about us politicians then? We politicians should take into account that we want a strong economy capable of working in an economic competition, because the future of the economy can become a failure because of the poor policies adopted by the politicians. Unfortunately, the opposite, the other way around, we cannot have. Competitiveness is the main instrument of sustainability of the policies of the EU. Economy versus the revenues of the budget of the EU? Well, there is a close relationship between these two aspects. The better the economy works, the higher the level of the budget of the EU. When we discuss the future financial framework, I don't think in Romania's current mandate, in Romania's presidency of the European Council, things will be concluded. I suppose the conclusion will happen during the mandate of the future Parliament that will be elected in May. The European Commission and the European Parliament decided upon conditionalities, one of which we Romanians wonder about, namely the conditionality concerning the state of law and the respect for the state of law. We know that this concept is not sufficiently developed. Of course, the level of integration of the states within the EU is different. Romania, for instance, is such an example of a difference. And I believe, bearing in mind the Sibiu summit, until then, we will bring to shed more light on some unclear points. If the leaders and the political groups in the European Parliament take into consideration a new law on the conditionality of the observance of the state of law, which are the circumstances ensuing from this conditionality? And maybe the following question will get an answer. Which are the institutions of the EU that notice the violations of the laws, and which are the gradual sanctions and penalties that could be applied to member states? Well, these are some of the elements which I believe the politicians should sort out, and those who are better in economic training, they should do their job as well.
To my counterpart in Croatian Parliament, Domagoj Ivan Milosevic. The next speaker is Klaus-Peter Wilsch from Germany. And don't forget, push the button in order to be found by the cameras. So red is the speaker, green the next speaker. Next speaker to push the button. Yeah, now we could find you. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Gabriela. Good afternoon. I'd like to say a few words today, not only as a Croatian MP, but also as the Vice President of SME Europe of the EPP. And I kindly ask you all to turn both eyes and then hopefully keep one long-term on the SMEs and the micro businesses, because these guys represent the backbone of our economies, and these guys face the real challenges in the 21st century. They say all the businesses started small, and that's probably truth, but in the 20th and 19th century and the 21st century, the small businesses, as the game changed, has bigger and bigger barriers and coming big, harder and harder, even in the IT, by the way. So to address these issues, we would need first to decrease the bureaucracy, eradicate the red tapes, because the smaller the company, the bigger the barriers. Second, we need to secure for the SMEs and the micro businesses competitive finance and equity. We need to secure access to new technologies and top education. If it means heavily subsidizing this education, I think it's worth to do it for the SMEs and the micro. And last but not least is the challenge of the labor force and the labor market. And obviously for different reasons, but it is a challenge for all the SMEs across the European Union, in the most competitive and the least competitive of the member states. And, well, the single market did bring us also the single labor market. and which means brain drain, which is an issue for some. But I think and strongly believe the brain waste is a problem for everybody. Because if Croatian professor or an engineer works in Germany as a waiter, that's a real waste for all of us. And this brings us to my last issue, which is the internal migrations. Internal migrations and the brain drain is an issue for the whole European Union, because these migrations do threaten the economic, social, and political progress of many member states, which means also the European Union. Thank you. And I would love to hear later on some reflections on this labor market and the internal migrations challenge. Thanks.
Thank you. Klaus-Peter Wilsch will take the floor. Gulert Duran from La Belgique is the next.
Yes, thank you, Ms. President. Dear colleagues, just a few thoughts on the further development of the Eurozone. I think we should, after the experience is made, think over the obligation to enter the Eurozone for all of the countries, because we already have made the experience that a common currency for very diverging economies in terms of competitiveness harms a lot of the members. Also the very competitive, because they are slower than they could be, and the interest rate is too low, and those who have to fight for the competitiveness, because you cannot differentiate with the interest rate. So I think if we are looking at the Eurozone as it's constructed now, there are still some things to do. We still don't have a rule on how you can leave the Eurozone. You know, there were member states who were discussing this in the political area, and even some of them are governing now, also they don't really try to do it now. But it, of course, like Brexit, which I regret, is the free will of the British people. If another country votes to say we get out of this common currency, we should pave a way for that, because we wouldn't be able to stop them if they really wanted to. And I think if we are talking about the topic of the savings insurance, we first have pretty a way to go in the topic of leveraging, lowering the risks in bank balances. There is still huge numbers of non-performing loans, and it would not be fair to bring insurances, savings insurances, together on this base. I think what also needed and should be taken into a new and better architecture are rules for the handling of state bankruptcy. And I think we should clarify, looking at the action that the ECB takes, what we mean with the prohibition of central banks, the central bank financing governments and states.
Thank you. Gulert Turan. Yeah. Agata Borowiec from Poland is preparing her speech. Please.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, for this. I would first, for the Belgian delegation, would like to thank you, the organizers, and Romania for the hospitality. We heard a lot of speakers, keynote speakers today, and they all confirmed actually one thing. We cannot continue as we are doing today. And actually, we are today discussing as if we are in business as usual. It is not business as usual, because all the world is watching us, Europe, as a sick child. So how can we compete with the global challenges if we are sick? we have to deal with ourselves in the first place. There are a lot of challenges, economically, financially, socially. We have migration, but the subtitle chosen today by the Bulgarian presidency, cohesion, is a very good start, but it's not enough. We have to go further. We have to make an inclusive Europe, or we will not have any Europe any longer. The challenge is not in between us. The challenge is we have to battle the big global issues. Last week I visited China. They are busy with implementing the IT technology, artificial intelligence, preparing their youth for the future and conquering Africa while we are still talking. We have to take action, and to take action, we need a decisive Europe. We need a decisive Europe. In the Council of Europe, we still have the necessity of unanimity. If we stay with that decision-making process, we cannot go further. We have to tackle that in the first place, to be a strong Europe, and we are not today. We have to face that one. 2, labor market. Well, we have to come back to inclusive policies. The problem is not the newcomer, not the migrant, not the migration in between Europe, of outside Europe. The problem is the aging in Europe. We need all these people. Instead of blaming and shaming, we have to take action, and we have to implement them with our inclusive policies in our labor market. We have to activate them for our economies, and we don't. Furthermore, the national politicians, we all have to stop with blaming Europe for everything what's going wrong in our countries. Europe is the bad guy and we all are the good ones. That does not work any longer if we want to protect our major and most important project, namely the peace of the European Union. It's a wake-up call, and actually, I'm sorry, we are missing it. I come from Belgium, and United Kingdom is one of our most important export partners. It's a tragic comedy what's happening with UK today. We can laugh with it, we can pity it, but there is one thing sure, and that's our entrepreneurs, as my colleague already said, they have to do business, and they are in big uncertainty, and we politicians, we have to take that away today, or we will lose the trust and the belief in our politicians and in our Europe, and it's too valuable for that. So I want to know, when are we going to be a decisive Europe? That's my question, one and only question. Thank you.
We thank you. I used to say every day that European Union needs some founding mothers, because founding fathers were only in history. Agata Borovic from Poland, and the next speaker is Arman Yegoyan from Armenia.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman, dear colleagues. The new budget is an opportunity to shape our future within the European Union and build a system that can withstand future crises. Well, to be able to do that, we should be more ambitious about the size of the future EU budget. We fully acknowledge that the need to address new priorities, but suggestions that increase in spending for so-called new challenges like migration, security, climate, globalization, digitalization can be solely financed by cuts and transfer from the cohesion policy and the common agricultural policies are politically unacceptable. Well, we must stress that if we want Europe that is united and does not differentiate between old and new, the center and the periphery, there should be no trade-off between new and ongoing priorities. Well, we also must remember that the convergence process, bringing economic benefits to Europe as a whole, is still far from being complete. Mr. Dauderstedt identified this issue in his speech in the previous session very well. Thank you.
We thank you. Arman Yegoyan.
Thank you.
You are so kind to take the floor. Pia Lokin-Sassen from Netherlands is the next.
Thank you. My question will be directed mainly to Mr. Martinez Mongai. And it refers to the Europe as a global actor, and partly it will refer to expectations, capabilities gap, widely discussed in relevant literature on European studies. So what the EU expects from its immediate neighborhood? Stability, security. If so, then should the EU invest in that stability and security, not just give, for example, loans for more or less for less, but directly to invest in stability and security and thereby address almost all the issues discussed here regarding migration, regarding the technological difference, the difference between the technological and economic difference between and across countries. This is the first part of the question, and the second part refers to thoughts of a speaker from the previous session of the difference between the economic growth, so that even when developing countries, they grow their economies faster, it still does not mean that they one day will reach developed countries. So what does the EU aims to do to address this gap as well, the gap between developing and developed countries, which is in a way an issue not only between the EU and its neighborhood, but as we discussed today, it's an issue inside the EU economies as well. So I would like to hear the answer and reflections on both these issues. Thank you.
We thank you, Pia Lokin-Sassen. The next speaker is Dr. Dumitru Galba. I have to inform you something. During our conference, in order to participate to our debate, we have invited some representatives of academic field and think tanks working on European affairs and our day-to-day collaborators.
Good afternoon. No. My name is Dumitru Galba.
No, Pia Lokin first. Pia Lokin. Pia Lokin? No? There is? Now here? Our colleague from Netherlands? Yeah? Please. Take the floor. She's not there? Please. I can't see you for this reason. I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you for this conference. I want to state before, and for the hospitable reception we have already received for you. Doubtless this discussion on the economy of the future includes the development of our economy towards a circular, climate-neutral economy. We noticed this afternoon already that climate has been mentioned several times as an important issue. The European Commission has made a proposal in November 2018 in order to achieve a climate-neutral economy in 2050. The Dutch government supports the efforts of the European Commission, and the Dutch House of Representatives has taken the initiative already to present a climate law, maybe an issue for other national parliaments. Climate change is a global issue. It's affecting all of our countries and cannot be solved on a national level alone. Vast, innovative investments will be necessary to reach the goal of a climate-neutral economy in 2050. It gives us the possibility to save costs in the future and to become more independent of energy sources from outside European Union countries. It will create new, hopefully sustainable, future-proof employment. The Dutch delegation underlines the importance of an inclusive transition for the benefit of all people and not only for the few, and a fair and equitable distribution of the costs. We are looking forward to the Interparliamentary Conference on Climate in October 2019, organized by the Parliament of Finland. Thank you.
We thank you. Domnul Professor Dumitru Galba. The next speaker is Christian Buchmann.
Good afternoon. My name is Dumitru Galba. I came from academic field. Despite this, I will be very short because your time is very important. First of all, congratulations for this wonderful conference. I feel great in this select company. And yes, we strongly need to change the economic paradigm. We must change the paradigm of economic growth, the paradigm of economic performance. Non-reasonable reasons, costs must be the first. We don't have resources, we have no resources, we only borrow from the future generation. Through the eyes of our children, the sustainable development has three big pillars. First, the economic pillar, the second, the social pillar, and the third, the environmental pillar. I would like to add one more pillar, the culture. Everything goes from culture. If you need an example, consider the attitude of an educated man towards the environment. Yes, we need to change the economic model, we need to change the paradigm, and for our French friends, nous avons besoin d'un nouveau modèle.
Yes, we need a new model for the future.
And now my counterpart in the Federal Council of Austria, a member of the Troika meeting during this period.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm glad that you and your colleagues managed to set this important issue on today's agenda. We all know that it's important for Europe's people that our economic model, the social market economy, is truthful. We all trust more or less in our currency. We trust in the rule of law, and we trust in the basic freedoms. So I fully agree with Minister Teodorovich that we need, as he called it, to increase Europe's competitiveness. It's important to increase Europe's competitiveness. The question is, how can we increase this competitiveness? And I also agree with Professor Sabir, who mentioned that our economy delivered very well, if I understood it correctly. It's true, in the last decades, our economy worked quite well, and we also overcome the financial and economic crisis of the last years. I don't believe that we need a new economic model. I believe that we need to expand our economic model. Maybe it could be helpful if we set some parts of the ecological sector to this social market economy with the critical technologies together. There's
huge chance to create new jobs, to create wealth and to create welfare for the European people. And it would also help to reduce the risks of the climate change, and maybe it could reach also, as Professor Sabir mentioned, the goals of the Paris Agreement. Just three topics. First, the multi-annual financial framework was mentioned also by some of the speakers and the minister. Of course, we have to fund the agricultural sector. Of course, we have to give money to the cohesion programs. But if we want to increase our system, I think it's most important to spend money into innovation, into research and development, most of all for the critical technologies and in education. Secondly, fairness and transparency in taxation is crucial in my mind, and Damogaj Milosevic also mentioned it, speaking about the small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe. If you think on the internet business, it's important that we get fair regulation in taxes. And thirdly, as one who served in many functions in public and the private sector, I think it's rather important to look on the bureaucracy and to cutting red tape. We need it to trust our system. Thanks very much.
We thank you, stressing that among the first 30, the most competitive countries in the world, 17 are member states of the European Union. I give the floor to our friend Bernard Durkan, and Jaroslav Obremski from Poland is preparing his intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I think I'm not certain that we need to throw out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to the European economic model. I think we should improve on it. I think we should use the best operating features of it. And I think that we should emphasize those in the future with good effect. Some reference has been made to the non-performing loans as being an impediment. I disagree. In actual fact, that non-performance is compared with the appertaining circumstances at the time the loans were issued. Because most of those so-called non-performing loans are performing to the extent that they can and could perform in the present climate. And that should not be taken as a failure on their part. I think we should also remember, and this is important, reference has been made to the degree to which Europe lags behind the United States in terms of job creation in certain circumstances. Now, we should remember that there are large gaps in the American economy, just the same as there are large gaps elsewhere as well. And I think that if we compare that in 1988, Luxembourg was by far and away the leading contender in terms of income per capita in Europe. And it was way behind the United States. What is forgotten in the interim period is the degree to which the smaller countries throughout Europe have caught up with Luxembourg and also with the United States. And that is an example of how well the European economic model works and can still continue.
Thank you, Jaroslav Obremski. And the next speaker is Michael Dauderstadt.
Thank you. After the book of French economist Piketty, Czech Sedlacek or Stiglitz, we feel that something new is going in economy. Therefore, now in EU, we should look for a new solution, but not unify economy. It means taxes, social helps, and so on. Because in my opinion, mistake in one country will be better than disaster in complete unified EU. But on the other hand, discussion in EU are not about new economy, but first of all about new aims. We want to spend about 1% of total GDP of EU, and we want to solve a problem: cohesion, agriculture, defense, and necessary program for Africa. I think it is on this level not possible. And the second remark, today somebody of us complained of the problem of corruption in Romania. Of course it is the problem, but before I also attach to it, I want to be sure in some elements. The fact that here in Romania the problem is really deeper than in other countries in Southern Europe. The second, that prosecution treat every country in the same way, and the fact the accusation isn't the tool to cut in the future cohesion money for our part of Europe. On the other hand, I think that we should also criticize our part of Europe, that after 15 years, when we are in EU, it's time to give more open currency proposal to EU from our part of Europe. I think this conference is a step in good direction. Madam Crețu, thank you for it.
We thank you. Michael, please. And the last speaker from the hall is Gisèle Jourda from France.
I would like to come back to the question of public debt and the role of the central bank. I think that the constitution of the EMU and the ECB has been informed by German fears which go back to the Weimar Republic and the hyperinflation of the early 20s. So it's really something looking to the past and not to the future. We have to really rethink that and think about reforming the treaties in this regard. The criteria of the Maastricht Treaty, 3% deficit and 60% public debt, have no base at all in economic theory and no base in empirical things. If we look at the United States, for instance, they have a much bigger public debt, let alone Japan, or in these countries, the central bank is free to finance the public debt if it thinks necessary. And if we look at the overall macroeconomic mechanism, we have households usually saving money. And these savings are channeled either to the corporate sector or to the public sector. And if the corporate sector, for whatever reason, does not absorb it, the public sector has to do it, otherwise we have a problem. We have stagnation and recession. Or, as in the case of present Germany, for instance, we have a huge current account surplus, which means you rely on the debt of others. Other people have to go into debt in order to facilitate your economic prosperity.
Thank you very much. I have to admit that I agree with Michael Dauderstadt. And now, Gisèle Jourda. Gisèle.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank Ms. Crețu. I would like to thank the speakers for the clarity of their ideas. In France and in all the member states of the EU, this crucial question is raised. What kind of Europe do we want to have for ourselves and for the young people who are attached to this idea? In this moving world, given the fluctuating circumstances and the rise of powers such as China, how can we, in our European Union, how can we be reactive enough? How can we face the challenges absolutely necessary to be solved in order for the Union to survive? What I found surprising in the last few months is this lack of reactiveness. We do not react to terrorism. We do not react to the absence of solidarity amongst the member states. What kind of economic Europe do we want for our citizens? A few weeks before the elections, we should more than ever not give in to restrictive ambitions, but to write a new page in the history of the EU introducing adequate transformations or changes. It's not a matter of changing the model, it's a matter of updating to the modern world, adapting to this moving world, a world that moves chaotically many times. As regards the numbers and figures of Eurostat in 2018, the crisis affects the investors in the EU. The IMF speaks of underinvestment and austerity policies. We have the Juncker plan, which is ongoing. But how can we imagine a new economic EU without public and private investors? So this is the question that I raise for all of you.
Our keynote speakers to make their comments and answers. Now, the minister asked me to be the last speaker. So.
Okay, thank you very much for all the comments. I mean, I have taken good note. First, let me say that I'm happy to see that in the end, the Commission makes proposals which are rather consensual. So I think that today, the proposal concerning the more complete proposal concerning the reform and the deepening of EMU is that of the Commission. Of course, in many occasions, we are not followed by all the member states, and therefore we need to wait until all the member states are convinced that these proposals are the most adequate to let's say, complete the economic and monetary union. I'm happy to see that even here, at least in the speakers that within the speakers that have mentioned the issue, there is also quite a strong consensus concerning the need to end with the certain unanimity rules in order to, let's say, go ahead. I think that this is also in line with the Commission. Of course, I mean, I think that concerning the completion of economic and monetary union, and in particular, a series of aspects of the banking union, I'm thinking of EDIS, there is always this kind of, in my view, false debate between, let's say, risk reduction versus risk sharing. I think that both go hand in hand. As a matter of fact, what we have seen during the last years is that in many countries, non-performing loans have decreased in a significant way. I'm thinking of Ireland, I'm thinking of Portugal, I'm thinking even of Cyprus, countries that I follow very closely. And then I can say here that the reduction in non-performing loans, therefore, where many people understand as the risk reduction has been more than significant. And there are reports presented by the Commission in the different committees showing all the data and showing to what extent the reduction of risk has been really significant. And I would like to end with, at least this part, with a very clear message. In principle, there is no contradiction between risk sharing and risk reduction. If you manage to share risks, the risks are reduced as well. So I think that this is here, there is no contradiction. I also happy to see that there is a consensus that the EU budget should be, let's say, bigger in order to do certain things and to do it better. I mean, there was a question concerning the neighborhood policy, which I think would require a too long answer, but in a very schematic way, I would say that this neighborhood policy, what tries to find is reliable partners. On the one hand, by allowing these partners to, let's say, have access to a very large and high-income country, which would allow them to exploit comparative advantages and therefore to reduce the gap in terms of development. And of course, also in exchange, these neighborhoods these neighbors are asked to introduce the reforms, the institutional reforms, in order to adapt their economies to the new environment. A very short reaction concerning investment. I think that the Commission also agrees that investment should be fostered in the EU, and this is clearly, let's say, shown in the annual growth survey adopted by the Commission in the framework of the European semester cycle, in which one of the, let's say, notes of the virtuous triangle for development is investment. Thank you.
We thank you. André.
Yes, if I heard you correctly, but one always hears one with one's own ears, so, you know, I may be very biased in the way I've heard. If I heard you correctly, I think generally you seem to agree with the view that I put forward, that we are facing very important global challenges, and that our system is poorly designed to respond to those challenges. That's number one. Number two, I also heard you in general, maybe not all of you, maybe not you, Senator, but I heard you in general as agreeing with my view that our model, and if I call our model our social market economy model, what does it mean? Social market economy model means that we want, the market economy means the efficiency, the allocation of resources, the functioning of the markets as a tool of better allocation of resources, the role of the private sector, and the social being the equity. And I think this is what is specific about the European model of wanting to combine the efficiency of the market and the equity. I also heard you say that you broadly agree with that. Now, obviously, one needs to update that model, and one of the elements that one needs to update the model for is indeed the climate change issue. To me, it doesn't question the fundamentals of the model. We are still, our goals is still to have the market function and deliver improvements, but also in an equitable manner. But we need to do that, indeed, in order to be able to reach our objective, which is to have zero carbon emission by 2050. But I do not believe that the social market economy cannot deliver that. It's a question of guiding the model to do that. So if one agrees with that, then I think your role, not my role, your role as politicians is what you are going to deliver in order concretely to do something. Because it's very nice to say we are facing global challenges, we have a model that can deliver, but at the same time, what is it that we do together at the level of the European Union to meet together those challenges? Because we are sharing those challenges. And it seems to me, yes, that something that many of you have spoken about, the EU budget, the MFF, I know how difficult it is to come to an agreement to that, but this is a concrete element. What kind of projects do we want to do together that also demonstrates to the citizens that Europe are tackling together the global challenges using our specific model? And I saw also, Senator, and you will explain that in your concluding word, that you think I'm too pessimistic to believe that there is a real danger, and I hope we can avoid it, but I think there is a real danger that we are headed towards a bipolar world. And again, I repeat what I have observed for the last 2 years about China and the US and the difficult position of the EU in this toggle between the two, and each side of, and we saying, well, we share with the Americans a number of things, obviously values, but we share with the Chinese the multilateral system, and there we are sort of, a bit in between, but are we still relevant? And if we are not going to be able to be real actors in the technological, I don't want to use the term competition, but in the technological development, then by defect, we just will be not relevant. We will just be a zone, an important zone, sort of a large Switzerland, but will not be able to make their choices, and choices will be imposed upon us. We may still be fairly wealthy in economic terms, but we will have to abandon our social market economy system as a European way of life.
Nobody wants to abandon, but to build it.
You may not have the choice. Nobody wants it. You may not have the choice.
Please, Minister.
Okay, thank you. So, you mentioned the politicians, that we have to be the ones who really change the things. But as I see even today, as I saw even today, there are so many declarations, but not so many clear points, as my colleague from Belgium did very well. I think that the conclusions for our discussion today are exactly what our colleague mentioned before. To be very frank, I heard something about the corruption or rule of law. Corruption, maybe from the colleague from Poland? No, this is what I heard. Yeah, you see, I never said something about corruption when I was in Poland. And believe me, that I know for all the countries present here, very nice stories about what means corruption, different discussions between your ambassadors here in Bucharest, discussing with us in the government, with different occasions, for different projects, for different ideas. So this is one issue. I'm not starting to discuss about rule of law or corruption, but it's just an example about the way to change, in the good sense, Europe, to apply the same rules for everybody. The same rules, the same treatment for everybody in terms of rule of law. Small and medium enterprises, financing price, I don't know, different, in any sector we can discuss about this main element, equal treatment between us. I said before that we don't have to compete each other, we have to complete each other. But this is the reality. We are discussing about the EU family, the very nice European family. But to be very honest, between us, all of us, we are fighting each other. This is the right approach. This is not the right approach. This is the real situation. Being Minister of Finance today, being the President of the ECOFIN, I cannot say more about it. But for sure I will say it after these first 6 months of our presidency. But believe me, being since 91 in the public administration, Romanian public administration, and this maybe the oldest in Romania, in this relation between Romania and the EU, I know I was involved in the negotiations. I know how the Commission is doing every time. And this is what I mentioned also to Mr. Vice President Katainen last time when I discussed about the EIB, about the InvestEU, where to put the Secretariat of InvestEU, in the Commission or in the EIB. And I say it very clear that from my point of view, the EIB is the right position, the Secretariat to be located in the EIB, not in the Commission, because in the Commission everything is political. And this is my very clear, let's say, message, if I can say it like this. I asked last time when I was in Brussels, Mr. Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis, why the commissioners are allowed to be involved in campaign, political campaign. I was surprised because I don't know to whom to address a message if I'm discussing with the commissioner, to the commissioner as a person being involved in a campaign in its own country, or to the commission. And he told me, yes, Eugene, this is for the first time when we decided to do in this way, because the members of the governments in different countries are also allowed to be involved in the campaign. Okay, but there are some differences. You are appointed, nominated as a commissioner to protect all the countries. Doesn't matter, all 28 member states in the same way. But anyway, it's a subject to be discussed. Maybe when we are discussing about the future of Europe, we discussed two weeks ago here, I think in the same room, in the European Regional Committee. Okay, cities, committees, blah blah. This type of European language, and we discussed with many future young leaders of the EU, and I said that first of all we have to fix the main principles, the right principles, based on which these new leaders will start to set up the future of Europe, if we would like to say or to change something for our benefit. Anyway, so I said to complete and not to compete, and in this respect we have to change. I think in substance the way today we are discussing about the EU policies, and just information for you. I think that this week will be the ECOFIN meeting organized here in Bucharest, where all the ministers of finance will be present, also the governors of the central banks. And for the first time, I think I invited the social partners to be part of the discussion, to be part to have a real dialogue when we are discussing about the future of Europe. And there were some friends a little bit upset because I invited the social partners to be part of the discussion. Why? We are discussing without our social partners at the same table. Why? And I think that from now on, all the presidencies must invite to the all informal councils of ministers, not only in ECOFIN, in all informal councils, the social partners to be part to the discussions, to discuss different issues, different subjects, which are quite important for our future. Our colleague from Croatia mentioned made some message regarding the small and medium enterprises and about the bureaucracy, the financing, different rules. And this is what all the time I'm saying, that there are so many rules applied in a different way between our countries, between our companies, between our sectors. That's why I ask our competition council in Romania to change the law, to set up a new department to assess the way Romanian companies are treated in different member states, in transport sector, in agriculture, in different sectors. And I think that this is similar in not most of the cases, most of the member states, but in the eastern part of Europe mainly. And maybe when the new commissioner for competition will start the future mandate, to have as a main priority, to put as a main priority for the next mandate this issue, to try to do what she or he has to do, to be sure that there will not be any different treatment between our member states, between our companies. Otherwise, we are speaking about our future. We are discussing about some schemes at the EU level, unemployment scheme. How can somebody imagine that I have to put from the state budget some money to support an employment scheme, for example, in Germany? Why? To keep my Romanians unemployed in Germany? This is the right way? Or to protect the investments in the EU? How can I protect? How can the investment in a very big member state can be protected? How? So to put the money, to have this fund and to be used when the big investments from the western part of Europe are more or less blocked if a crisis is coming. Why? Why such policies instead of trying to see how can we encourage in this eastern part of Europe the labor force to be stimulated to let's say to come, and because we have the EU money, we have the projects, and we don't have enough labor force. About brain waste, also our colleague mentioned before that this problem of, let's say, brain waste. Yes, we invested a lot in professors, in doctors, in, I don't know. And I asked my colleagues from the Ministry of Public Finance to prepare a clear situation, to see how much money do we invest in this, at least in these two sectors, in the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years in Romania, and how many of them are still are working abroad, Romania in the western part of Europe. So these are the main issues to be discussed, clarified, and to find some solutions to all these issues. Otherwise, we'll keep unbalanced the entire Europe. And for sure, and only one issue, I will stop. I bring into discussion an idea. Being involved, as I said, since '91, being auditor, managing EU funds, when one current commissioner, Barnier, I remember one discussion I had with him in 2014, when Romania succeeded to, I don't know, to increase the absorption very fast, from 11.4 up to, I don't know, 80, 91% as it is today. And he asked me, Mr. Eugene, something was wrong in our country. How it was possible to increase so fast the EU absorption? You see what the Polish colleague mentioned before. Why we have to be labeled without any reason? Why? And it's not only the case of Romania. Maybe it's the case of also other different member states. We are or we are not in a real family. And about this rule, and for sure I'm finishing now. So I bring an idea because we discussed about investments. N-2 rule. What means this rule? We are fighting, all of us, to extend, to have this N+3 rule. Maybe most of you use this rule. Okay, N+3. But why we are not fighting to decrease, to start the investments before the official deadline or the new financial framework? This is the idea, to start the investments even before the legal financial framework will start. And then, if everything is done based on the EU rules, the payments to be reimbursed by Brussels in the new financial framework. Do you think that the US or China, or I don't know how other states are discussing about this, from my point of view, very good rule, but putting this idea in a very bureaucratic way and not starting to apply from the next day? So these are subjects to be discussed. Otherwise, it will be very nice declarations, very good. I don't know. You discussed. Sorry, this is the last issue I mentioned because I like the idea. I love the idea. It was mentioned before about deficit and public debt and all these issues. Yes, indeed. Do you know that even these rules are applied in a different way? We are discussing about deficit to be below 3%, but you know our public debt. We are the fourth, the fifth, the lowest public debt in the EU. Okay, and we have countries with more than 100%, but the rules are different. The excessive procedure can be launched, open, even if we have no. You see why? Anyway, there are some questions without any reply. But anyway, we have so many meetings from now on, and we are discussing about the future of Europe. But once again, if we don't have a pragmatic approach, the distance between us and the others will be higher and higher. Thank you.
You can imagine which kind of interesting debate we could have in our committee, being strong persons with very different opinions. 1 minute, I regret very much not being there and being here to moderate and not to speak. What I heard that the main achievement of the European Union by now, undeniable, is internal market with its 4 freedoms. That means that European Union has an economy without borders. Instead, we have a new trend to move the responsibility from the community level to the member states level to deal with all macroeconomic imbalances after they gave up to the instruments of interventions. At least the countries member already of Eurozone they don't have the monetary instruments of intervention to do something. How to deal with macroeconomic imbalances without having instruments to intervene. I have an answer for my colleague. Why we need that unemployment European scheme? Because there is no political will to fix euro. Actually, we have a common currency, not a single currency. That means we have 19 different currencies. Yes, dollar could be stronger because United States has a federal budget of 23% of GDP and a transfer from the federal budget to the member states of 12%, something like this. And we fight each other to have 1% European budget. And we think that we could fix everything by ourselves doing all kind of small movements. At the moment, unfortunately, I wrote an article 2 days ago with a big title. It was "The Unbearable Unrealism of Our Elites." It fits to many. Person speaking. Thank you very much for being here.